Welcome everybody. Welcome to another session on English Core meant for class 12. This video session is being prepared for the students of Queens Valley School. In this video session, we are going to discuss the text Keeping Quiet. That's a poetry text written by author Pablo Neruda. The textbook that you need to refer to for this particular text is Flamingo. Just a reminder, I hope that you've already read the text at least twice and have analyzed the notes given to you related with this text. I would also like to remind you that before watching this video session, you must have your textbook, your notes, your practice notebook, and a pen ready so that you may note down whatever queries you might have. I'm also hoping that you have a list of queries ready for me, which I hope to resolve through this particular session. Let's begin. Let's begin by looking at about the poet lines. Let's read the last 3 lines. In this poem, Neruda talks about the necessity of quiet introspection and creating a feeling of mutual understanding among human beings. These lines have been highlighted for you. I'll read them one more time. In this poem, Neruda talks about the necessity of quiet introspection, that is our first keyword, and creating a feeling of mutual understanding. This is our second keyword. We would have to see how, according to Neruda, one can move from quiet introspection to arriving at a feeling of mutual understanding. This is going to be the focus of the text. I would also like to draw your attention towards before you read lines. What does the title of the poem suggest to you? What do you think the poem is about? Before we go into analyzing those keywords a little bit more, let me tell you about the setting of the text. Through this given text, we are really looking at mesmerizing words of wisdom amidst a world infected by warmongering tendencies, self-destructive engagements, and mind-boggling pursuit of success. It is in the 20th century that Pablo Neruda writes this particular text. The Industrial Revolution, capitalism, and the post-Second World War world become the defining moments for Neruda's Keeping Quiet. In the words of Maria Popova, and I quote, "No poet breaks the silence with silence, nor slices through its vitalizing, clarifying, and transcendent power with more piercing elegance than Pablo Neruda in the poem titled Keeping Quiet." Unquote. The poem was written in the 1950s and published posthumously in the 1974 bilingual collection Extravagaria. This is what we get to see about Pablo Neruda. He is going to talk about the importance of silence in a world riddled by war, by power equation, and, as he puts it, sadness. Now let's try to understand what he really wants to tell us through the text that he has written. Now we will count to 12 and we will all keep still. Look at the opening lines of the text. He wants to count up to 12 and keep still. Please notice the use of the first person plural over here. He actually calls upon all humanity, all listeners, all audience, and along with them, he would like to count up to 12. Now this 12 is merely a number. It does not really represent anything very specific or very momentous. This counting up to 12 is just a way to initiate people into becoming quiet, into becoming still. It is like a preparation for what is to come. Once the poet makes everybody still, makes everybody quiet, only then the poet can deliver the message that he wants to deliver. So he is trying to make everybody count to 12 and keep still. If you ask me why only 12, then what I can say is that you may look at it as a number which talks about the passage of time. For instance, there are 12 months in a year, there are 12 hours in a clock, but other than that, I cannot give you why he chose 12. Ultimately, it is just a way in which he wants other people to become quiet and realize something very important. That something is given to you in the next stanza. Let's read. For once on the face of the earth, let's not speak in any language. Let's stop for 1 second and not move our arms so much. So this is the way in which he wants the people who are listening to him to become quiet. And this is going to be an unprecedented moment. for once on the face of earth. Look at the urge of the poet to make other people quiet. He says, let's not speak in any language. He is trying to eliminate all difference by creating an equality based on silence. He is asking people to drop all language, to drop all action, so that they become united at the level of being silent. Let's stop for 1 second. We know that we always keep moving. All human beings always keep moving. And it is not only about the physical movement, it is about communicating with others, using gestures, using language, using movements. That is what he wants to stop. Also, look at this, arms. Let's not move our arms so much. As has been highlighted for you, it is a literary device. A pun has been used over here. The literal movement of the body, that could be one meaning. He wants our arms to stop. He wants us to stop. Physical movement has to stop. And the second meaning could be arms standing for armament, arms standing for weapons. Now, how is it that he is referring to arms or weapons in the text? It is because this text is set in the background of the 20th century. Neruda has already seen two world wars and he is a pacifist. He is anti-war as far as his ideological position is concerned, and he wants people to stop waging wars on others. He wants countries or nations to stop waging wars on others because, according to him, waging wars on others is not only going to affect the rest of the people but also the self. It is also going to affect the planet. It is also going to affect the entire human race. Let's move a little bit more and then we will explore that idea again. It would be an exotic moment without rush, without engines. We would all be together in a sudden strangeness. Now, he says, if at all human beings actually listen to him, or the readers or the listeners actually listen to him and become still or quiet, then that would give rise to an exotic moment. Now, why is it that this moment would be called exotic? It is because that would be an unprecedented moment. That would be an extraordinary moment wherein we would stand united without any rush or without any engines moving. Now, look at that vocabulary. You would find that this is a clear reference to industrialization and urbanization. It is a moment like that that Pablo Neruda wants everybody to arrive at. It is going to be an unprecedented moment of silence, introspection, togetherness, and brotherhood, wherein nothing else would matter. Nationality, linguistic concerns, regions, nothing would matter. The only thing that would unite all the human beings would be purely their human self. And he says, we would all be together in a sudden strangeness. Of course, that would be a sudden kind of a moment. That would be something which has never happened. And it would be on the urge of the poet, on the request of the poet, that everybody would come together, would stand still. So there is a suddenness about it. Of course, also there is a strangeness about it. What kind of a strangeness? Because that is not the usual human self. Human beings have the tendency to keep moving. But upon the urge of the poet, if we all can just become still, that would be an exotic moment, and that exotic moment would be a moment of sudden strangeness. Look at the literary device used over here. It is the repetition of the sound sir in sudden strangeness. So that would be alliteration. Now, as the poet moves on to the third stanza, the poet is going to tell you what that exotic moment would result in, if at all that could be arrived at. I would just go back a little. He asks everybody to count to 12 and keep still. That is an initiation. Then he says, how is it that we have to begin that process? And he asks us to drop all language, stop all communication, stop moving our arms so much. And then he talks about how that moment, if that can be arrived at, would be a moment of sudden strangeness. Now he is talking about the effects that that moment would lead to. And those effects have been talked about by way of examples. Look at the first instance here. Fishermen in the cold sea would not harm whales. Look at these two lines only. Fishermen in the cold sea would not harm whales. Now, fishermen, of course, is symbolic of the entire humanity, the people who are engaged in activities which cause harm to the planet. Look at this, harm whales to nature, to fellow beings. When we cause harm to the fellow beings, it could be within or outside the species, then ultimately we are causing harm to the planet. And causing harm to the planet would lead to causing harm to the self. So fishermen in the cold sea would not harm whales if that exotic moment is arrived at. So that is the first instance that Neruda quotes from human life. Then he moves on to the next instance. He talks about the man gathering salt. So first it was the fisherman. Secondly, it is the man gathering salt. What does the man gathering salt usually engage in? He engages in gathering salt from the sea. Again, just like the fisherman, he is working for earning a livelihood, but in the process of earning a livelihood, he is engaged in an activity which would lead to hurt hands. Hurt hands would mean hurting the self, harming the self. So the fisherman was engaged in an activity which would harm other species. The man gathering salt is another instance which talks about those people who are engaged in activities which cause harm to the self. Look at hurt hands. This is one phrase which again is an instance of alliteration. The sound h has been repeated over here. Basically, what we are looking at is that Pablo Neruda is giving us instances of various kinds of people engaged in various kinds of occupations who, in the moment of introspection, will realize the various ways in which they have harmed themselves and the external environment. But he does not stop with these two examples. He quotes another example as well. He talks about those people who prepare green wars, wars with gas, wars with fire, victory with no survivors, would put on clean clothes and walk about with their brothers in the shade doing nothing. Now, just as the fisherman would stop harming whales, the man gathering salt would stop and look at his hurt hands. Similarly, those people who prepare wars would put on clean clothes, walk about with their brothers in the shade, doing nothing. So with this instance, Neruda is actually talking about those people who cause direct harm to humanity as well as the planet. He talks about those people who prepare wars. Look at the kinds of wars that have been mentioned here. He talks about green wars. He talks about wars with gas and wars with fire. This is a clear reference to the First and the Second World War. More prominently, the Second World War. He is talking about environmental warfare. He is talking about atomic warfare. And he is talking about the effects that such wars lead to. He is talking about those people who are engaged in the conceptualization, propagation, and execution of wars. He is talking about the politicians, the statesmen, the scientists who are involved in initiating and aggravating wars. Neruda says that once the exotic moment is arrived at, these people also would put on clean clothes and walk about with their brothers in the shade doing nothing. Now, it is very clear that for Neruda, a victory in war could be a victory of scientific advancement or ideological position. But according to him, it is a victory without any survivors, which means that it is a hollow victory, that victory is not going to lead to any good. Clean clothes is a reference to cleansing of the soul. It is symbolic of a new beginning. It is a form of resurrection of the soul. They would put on clean clothes and walk about with their brothers. Now, here Neruda is invoking the concept of universal brotherhood. He is saying that all the human beings are ultimately united at the level of being humans. They would walk about with their brothers in the shade. Shade again has a symbolic meaning. It would be about staying away from the harshness of the world, which is infected by jealousy, hatred, intolerance, power equations, and a race to prove ideological supremacy. Neruda suggests how bringing the destructive activities to a halt, the destructive activities like war to a halt, people can actually look at the other people as brothers with a feeling of empathy, tolerance, and love. And then he says, doing nothing. What would doing nothing imply? Look at the phrase. How can somebody do nothing? But then, according to Neruda, that is what is required, which means doing nothing in order to aggravate wars, doing nothing in order to go against the health of the planet, doing nothing in order to cause any harm to the fellow human beings or to the rest of the living species on the planet. But that can be arrived at only when human beings stand united in an exotic moment, when they realize that it is one common thread that binds them all, and that is their human self. And in the next stanza, he clarifies when he says doing nothing, he does not mean to say that he is asking the people to become totally passive. He says, what I want should not be confused with total inactivity. He says that keeping quiet, the activity of becoming silent, should not be equated with complete passivity or death. It should not be equated with total inactivity. Total would be final, inactivity would be death or annihilation. So he is not saying that it is only with everybody becoming dead that such kind of a peaceful state may be arrived at. He is rather pointing at the regenerative potential of human beings. He says life is what is about. He says life is about moving. Life is about progress, about moving ahead. It does not mean becoming inactive. Life and death are contrary concepts. And even as he says that, he does not mean to say that immortality is the solution. No, he says life is what it is about. He is not unaware of the idea of natural death. Of course, he knows that human beings are mortal beings and they would die one day. But the idea that he's against is the self-inflicted pain or self-inflicted death that human beings become a cause for. He says life is what it is about. Life represents growth, regeneration, rejuvenation, possibilities, development. And that concept of life nowhere includes the idea of self-inflicted death that human beings are causing not only to the self but also to other human beings, other species living on the planet and the planet itself. He says, I want no truck with death, which means he refuses to associate or deal with or tolerate death. He does not want to tolerate a death which human beings cause to other human beings or to other living species or to the planet. So what exactly is he saying? He is saying that human beings should come together, practice silence, engage in active introspection, do nothing to cause death to the planet, to the self, to other people, and display the regenerative human potential. He talks a little about the nature of human life in this century. Look at these lines. If we were not so single-minded about keeping our lives moving and for once could do nothing, perhaps a huge silence might interrupt this sadness of never understanding ourselves and of threatening ourselves with death. Look at the word sadness here. Pablo Neruda states the causes of this sadness as well. He says the sadness of never understanding ourselves, that is point number one, and of threatening ourselves with death, that is point number two. He says that it is because we never understand ourselves that we feel the pangs of sadness. And then he says that it is because all our activities are directed towards death that we feel the pangs of sadness. And this primarily is human life for Pablo Neruda in the 20th century. He says that human beings are so much at odds with other people other human beings that they do not even realize the magnitude of sadness that they are creating in their own lives. And he says that there is a way out. The way out of this sadness in their lives is an interruption through huge silence. And that exactly is doing nothing or arriving at the exotic moment through silent introspection. He says, if we were not so single minded, he says that human life is single minded in its pursuit for wealth and success, for a sense of achievement, for one-upmanship, for proving a point, for becoming ideologically superior to the other, for showing other people down. All of that. He says if we were not so single-minded about keeping our lives moving, the idea of keeping the lives moving, according to human beings, is to just go blind on all other aspects of life and focus on a single-minded pursuit of success. And that exactly is what is problematic for Neruda. He says that we are forever preoccupied with the idea of keeping our lives moving. And if we just take a break from that particular kind of life, from the humdrum of life, then only this huge silence will be able to interrupt the sadness that has become so much a part of human life. He moves on to invoke a symbol from nature to say that there can be life under apparent stillness. Look at the last few lines of the text. He says, perhaps the earth can teach us as when everything seems dead and later proves to be alive. In these 3 lines, he is drawing a parallel between human life and earth, the way the earth functions. If you have ever noticed, the earth actually sprouts to life as soon as conducive conditions are provided to them. You must have read that in The Voice of the Rain in class 11. The dormant seed comes to life as soon as favorable conditions are provided to it, which means the rain. Here also a similar kind of a thing has been said. Earth can teach us as when everything seems dead and later proves to be alive. When earth comes back to life in the season of spring, it is not as if somebody had carefully sown the seeds just before spring was about to arrive and then only the earth could sprout to life. The earth was anyway preserving the seeds within itself and waiting for the right moment to sprout to life, to let the seeds germinate. Which is to say that in that particular seed was locked the potential for life, which as soon as conducive conditions were provided to it, sprang to life. Similarly, Neruda is trying to say that human beings have within themselves the potential to bring about a change, to rejuvenate themselves, and to make the world a better place to live in. Also, please realize when somebody is still and when that person is introspecting, it is not that they are dead, it is not that they are passive, it is actually a moment when their minds are working and they are trying to introspect. Introspection is the inspection of the self. And what exactly is inspected? It is a person's thoughts and actions which are analyzed, which are inspected in order to arrive at a realization. So according to Neruda, when everybody would be united through that string of silence and all of them would be introspecting, then they would realize that ultimately no language, no national barriers, no ideologies ultimately unite them. It is one single thing that unites them, and that is their humanity. So when they drop all communication, when they stop all kinds of movement, it is only in that moment that human beings would realize the regenerative potential of silence. And once that happens, the human beings would be able to arrive at a realization that all their actions and activities were ultimately directed towards causing a harm to not only the self but also to other beings and the planet. And then only will they realize the futility of war, the futility of such actions. And that would give them a moment to come together as brothers and would lead to a world defined by universal brotherhood, peace, and harmony. As the poem comes to a close, Neruda says, "Now I will count up to 12 and you keep quiet and I will go." Look at the literary device refrain as it is used here. Also, please notice how there is a crucial shift from the first person plural to the first person singular. Having conveyed whatever the poet wanted to convey to the reader or to the listener or to the audience, the poet would like the reader to practice whatever has been said. The message has been delivered, the value of the message has been delivered, the process through which that message can be received has also been taught to the readers. So, having conveyed the wisdom of serenity and peace, he wants to leave the readers with themselves and asks them to now count up to 12 and keep quiet so that the messenger, the poet, can leave. He wants the readers to now practice what has been learnt. He wants the readers to now sit quietly and enter a phase of introspection, meditation, and try to realize what the world lacks. In this particular slide, I have tried to simplify the poem for you using the keywords only. Look at the first one. Silence. It is by becoming silent that human beings would get to practice quiet introspection. And it is through introspection that they would realize the harm that they have been inflicting on the self, on the fellow beings, and on the planet. It is through the same introspection that they would realize the causes of sadness in human life. So, it is by an analysis of the thought and the action that human beings would arrive at a state of realization. And it is with a state of realization that they would realize the worth of life that they had been destroying so recklessly for so long. For Neruda, life is of utmost importance, and he also believes that human beings have the potential, they have the capability to regenerate life. There is a possibility to bring back life into this world which is ridden with negativity and self destruction. He focuses in his text on the necessity of mutual harmony, universal brotherhood, and world peace. And the solution, according to Neruda, lies with the individual. According to him, each individual would have to put in that effort in order to realize that they are a part of a larger community. And once that larger community realizes the harms that they are doing to the planet, they would also realize the futility of all their actions. And it is through that that world peace would be established. In this particular slide, I have prepared 10 quick revision questions for you. Please read the text one more time, watch the video session again, and try to answer these questions. Happy learning!